major problem. How do you intend to address it?
How to address it? If you take in terms of definition, there would be many components of the definition of human rights. But as I said before, the most important word that we should retain from all these talks about the definition of human rights is the human dignity. Now, what do you put in that word dignity? And that would help you go through the whole range of components that would allow you to define human rights. And for that, most of the convention and the covenants that were signed addressed specific areas like, social and political, social and economic rights, like political rights, like the right of the Convention of the Right of the Children, for instance, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. All these identify specific rights that are part of the definition. I would link it to why is that this what I called democratic deficit is impeding the achievement of these rights. If the democratic is at all functioning, citizens have the possibility to voice their concerns out through their representatives, through their elected representatives. And for that, you ought to allow the participation. That's why I said we should engage into a kind of human rights movement that would teach individuals to know their rights so that they can influence the outcome of political decisions in their countries. It's not an easy task, but at the same time, it is feasible in the sense that we shouldn't be keeping human rights at the level of intellectuals, students like you, or human rights practitioners like me, but go down to the communities and teach them their rights. That's how we should build from the bottom up and make sure that we can make a difference in advancing human rights cause and the dignity of individuals, the dignity of humanity.
Can I take the second question, which is really a two-part question, part one on subsidies and part two on US contribution to the United Nations system. On subsidies, I hope you understand that subsidies are a gift of free money to underperforming, ineffectual people. People who cannot compete, people who are not good producers, come to the government and say, oh, I'm a very bad producer. And the government says, don't worry, here's some money and go and live in peace, even if you don't produce. Now that's not economics. Economics is about competitive advantage in production techniques. That's what classical economics is. If you want to survive, you have to work harder, you have to produce better. If you cannot work harder and produce better, you have to give way to those who can beat you by producing better and working harder. But that is where the distortion comes in subsidies. So subsidies completely distort the concept of the free market and the concept of the competitive edge, which underlies the fundamentals of economics. And therefore they are not justifiable. They are not justifiable economically, they are not justifiable morally, they are not justifiable socially. And they will die out. You can keep them alive with injections of oxygen and Viagra for some time, but ultimately they will die. So much for subsidies. The second question was about what you gave me the impression of saying was the huge amount that the United States contributes to the UN system. The UN contribution to the UN budget is less than $400 million. which works out to $1.50 per person per year in the United States. That's it. It cannot buy you a subway token in New York. That is the degree of the US commitment to the UN system. Now, there are other voluntary funds also, but they are of the same order of magnitude. So please do not get the impression that the huge amounts of money are being put in. It's just not so. This is talk. The fact of the matter is that we had an agreement on 0.7%, and the US contribution is only 0.14%. And these are statistics that cannot be denied. And so rework out the fundamentals of your question. Over to Madison for 2 questions from that end.
And I was wondering, because poverty and inequality are intimate components of human rights violations, are there concrete examples in Africa where the decrease in poverty and inequality led to improvement of human rights?
Yeah, very good question, please.
A very good question. I am trying to find out whether there is any example of improvement. There are some countries who are improving, but they are still facing another drawback, which is conflict. Uganda, you mentioned Uganda. Uganda is Malawi, yes, the emerging country, but Botswana is another, quite stable. But at the same time, these countries are in a sort of learning process, and I said we ought to go there and bring more in the knowledge of human rights, and also in education, learning, training for the participation of the population. Concrete examples are rather rare, but the movement should be growing as well, and this is where we should be engaging many countries in. Of course, you have to get the buy-in by the government itself. And this is not an easy task. Some governments are moving ahead on that. Some others are still hesitating. But we hope that this kind of global movement, and including the work that the Human Rights Council would be doing in coaching individual countries to abide by their obligations or their duties, would help many other countries to look at that possibility, provide that the issue of conflict is solved of the world.
I would just like to add that many of you in these universities are global scholars, and many of you go and visit other countries. I would hope that you will have the opportunity of going on visits not just to developed countries, but also to developing countries, so that you can see some of these problems firsthand. But I'm sorry once again not to have taken the second question from Madison. Over to you for your second question.
I'm Amanda McCobb, a freshman history major, and I was wondering, how can we as students and people not necessarily in the forefront of the government help to ensure the adherence to the Declaration of Human Rights in the future, not only in the United States, but around the world?
What do you expect from these students?
You give me one of the answers already by saying that we need you to go to these countries and know what is going on. University exchange. Many countries in Africa, in Asia, and in the Middle East have very good universities that could actually welcome you in either a sort of volunteer work or a visit for a week or so to look at what is going on in these countries. There is a lot to be done, and even here in the US, there is still a lot to be done in adhering to grassroots movements. There are a number of human rights militants out there who are ready to welcome you in giving you the basics of their fight, the basics of human rights, and also to make sure that the news are spread to the rest of the country And then from there, we would take it to